So I wanted to go back over MASH again this week. So I've loaded in some geometry that I'm going to want to use MASH to instance some trees on. And I did a little bit of this in the previous MASH tutorial that I showed. But I wanted to just go over it a little bit more in a different fashion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back the usual tree node that I've used. So I'm going to bring it in. I've already created it as a Redshift proxy. So I'm going to do a create. There's the Redshift placeholder. So now I just need to find the file that I want. There's the proxy tree. It's this one I want. So you can see the Redshift proxy. So let's view that. So you can see here the Redshift proxy, like we've done before, comes in as a bounding box. You can preview the mesh. So you can see here, and you can see what I have selected. The actual object is quite large. It's 1.4 million polys, but it's a reference. So this is an instance of the tree that I have. Let me just render that real quick. So here you can see that's the tree that we're going to be scattering across our mesh. So let me just make sure. So our proxy is looking correct. It's in the center. Pivots at the bottom where we want the interaction with the land. Let me turn off the grid. So let's go back to our ground. There it is. So what I want to do first is I'm going to make a MASH network. So I'm going to select this tree, the proxy, and then go into MASH. I have animation as my tab, so I have MASH in the top. And I'm going to create a MASH network, and I want to make sure it's set to instancer. And I'll change these distribution types after. So I'm just going to apply and close. And as we know with MASH, basically, let me go back to there. You can see it's distributing that node through the distribution node in MASH. So if we go here, and then here's our MASH editor that I've called up. So I have a distribute node. There's 10 linear, so they're all in a row at a distance of x. But what I want to do is I'm going to change this to mesh, and then now you need to connect an input mesh. So that's our ground. So I'm going to middle mouse drag our ground to it, and then now you see that the instance is hidden. And then what you can see is if we make our element larger, the tree is now scattered across this piece. And you can see they're small, and it's a large mesh, so it's all over the mesh. And what we can do is, if I go back to the mesh, is I want to use, well, let me increase the density. So let's go to 100. And there you can see there's more. And now if we render this, you can see more dots, which are the trees. Now the thing that we can do in MASH is you can basically scale up your reference geometry. So all you really have to do is go back to your proxy, whatever you've instanced, and then you can basically just scale up that object, and it'll be directly influencing what's on the render. So if I just scale that up, we go back to our ground, and you can see there right away the trees are much bigger. And if we render, there we'll see a much bigger representation of the trees. So now what we can do is, well, there's just a few things in the element itself. Let me see if we can zoom in. We covered this in the last time I talked about it, but it's been a while. You can see the trees all across this geo. And what we want to do is we want to have the up vector on so that everything is pointing upwards. And we actually want to turn off calculate rotation so that the driving force for these trees is the fact that it's moving up. Because the trees, you don't want them growing at an angle off of the mountain. So it's deriving its orientation from the geometry that we have and then trying to force it to go up in Y. Now, see, ignore, so now we're pretty good. So now all we really want to do is we want to vary the distribution. So what we want to do is we can add a random node. So now we have a random. Random is going to change the positional data of anything that we've created. So what we want is just want to have everything go down to 0 for position because it's actually moving it by a unit of 1. And what we do want to do is we want a randomization of our tree in 360. So we'll randomly generate the rotation. And then what we can do is we could do a uniform scale of like 0.25. And since I did uniform, if I just do, oh, not in that, here, 0.25, we'll have a random scaling of our trees. So now if we go back to here and look at what we have, re-render, you can see rotation is starting to happen and you're seeing some scaling. So we're starting to have the same tree look a little different. And then now it really is just trying to change the distribution so we can make it. So here we are with 1,000. So let's try to do a render. So here we are with 1,000 populated. But you know, this is a large piece of geo. But look at how fast this is rendering. This is in 5 seconds with 1,000 of these trees. Where each tree, the original tree, was 1.4 million. We made an instance of that one tree as a Redshift proxy, and then now I've scattered 1,000 of them. Now the one thing that you will start to notice is the GPU, you know, you're starting to have a very slow response, more to be, not really the GPU, but the feedback in Maya to, you know, your screen. So one thing that you can do once you start feeling that tug is there's two things. The Redshift proxy itself, like we've talked about, when you have the mesh, you can lower that visibility so you still have an outline. Right now we just made it 10 and you can see a much, now we don't really have any lag in the processor. Here you can see again, we rendered in 4 seconds. But if you know you want to do a large blanket of this, what you can do is twofold. You can go to bounding box, and now we have just bounding boxes of all the scattering that we've got. So now if we do that, now we can go back to MASH, go to the distribute node, and then maybe now we go from 1,000 to 10,000. So now we have 10,000, and you can see even with 10,000, we can still scrub very well. So let me just zoom that in a little bit. We'll hit render, and there you can see 10,000 of these trees scattered across this geo is rendering in 7 seconds. Let's try to up it even more. So that's 10,000. Maybe try 20,000. GPU, we're able to toggle pretty well, so that's pretty impressive. So here you can see 20,000. And the other thing that you can do once this starts to get too much is you can actually change, where is it? In twofold. You could go to the proxy and then basically, well, we're bounding box for the proxy, right? So these are just, squares for every single time it's being referenced. And if we go back to our distribute, let's say we try to do, I don't know, 80,000. So let's see, are we starting to, so now it's starting to bog down a little bit, but we got 80,000 of these. So let's try rendering. So now, here you can see it's really covered the whole landmass of this piece of geo with small holes here and there. Now, you basically are blanketing the whole thing, so really, you don't really need to know where individual pieces are. So let's try something to be more efficient. So the other thing that you can do is within MASH itself, in the instancer, right now the level of detail is geometry. You can go to bounding boxes. And if I try to move here, there's still a little bit of lag because it's basically 80,000 bounding boxes like what we had before. But if you go back to the instancers, you can just do a complete bounding box. Now everything disappears, but you can see this larger bounding box over everything. And now, the GPU is starting to be freed up a little bit so that you can rotate and move around, so we're not really getting stuck so much. So that's just a way to kind of ease out, and that way you can still keep adding more things and more things. So let's try, well, we're at 80, let's try 180,000. So here you can see 180,000 trees. It's literally littering the entire piece of geo that we have here. You've only got a couple nooks and crannies where it's not, and in some areas you can see it's a much denser overgrowth of these trees, and it starts to take on like a jungle type look. So those are the ways that you can lighten up some of your MASH so you can still work within the viewport in Maya. And I just wanted to kind of show that a little bit more in detail.